Hi there.
Hi, teacher.
Okay, so let's see. Let's wait a couple of minutes. Okay, here we have. Hi, teacher. Good evening. Good evening, Jogalet. How are you?
Good evening.
Okay, guys. So maybe we can wait a couple more seconds. See if there's someone else that's gonna join. Okay, guys. All right. So please don't forget to have your cameras on. I think we can get started now. All right. So we're gonna carry on with the speaking section, but we're gonna start a new task. So far we've covered the first one, the independent one, where it was just your opinion about something. Last class we've seen question 2, which was about the college thing, the college change. And today we'll be looking at task 3. So actually task 3 and task 4, you will see that they are quite similar. I mean, the topics will be the same. The only difference will be really structured. But today let's focus on task 3. So, all right. So it's important to say that from now on, 3 and 4 both are academic tasks. So it's not going to be as casual as the other ones, you know. You maybe will have some new words there, some new terms, but it's still not rocket science. You will see it's quite understandable as well. So what you will have to do here is first you will read a short passage or reading passage or article, and in which you will have like the introduction to a certain topic, and then you will be listening to a lecture. So do you guys know what a lecture is? Anybody knows? Okay.
Teacher, I'm sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, I was asking if you guys knew what a lecture is. So, well, basically a lecture is just a college class. So it's a professor, a teacher, well, a university teacher, you know, a professor explaining the same topic. So you will read this for 45 to 50 seconds, and then you will have to listen to this lecture where the professor will be explaining that concept a bit more further. Okay, So that's it. Then you get the question, which will always be the same. I think it's using the examples from the lecture, explain, and whatever the topic is, okay? So we'll be analyzing the question later. About time, as for time goes, you will have 30 seconds to prepare your response and then 60 seconds to speak. So it's the same amount of time that you have for task 2 and that you will have for task 4, for all of the integrated ones. 30 to prepare and 1 minute to speak. So any questions so far about that? Okay. Now, regarding the content, so here are the topics that you may find. So the good thing is that we do know what topics you will find. It's not like in the listening, for example, where you have no idea what topics you will have there. It could be literature, history, could be sometimes psychology or physics, biology. But here we do know, so that means that even your vocabulary could be oriented towards this task, right? So the most common topics to find are these ones: psychology, biology, and business. Believe me, from all of the practice sets that I've seen, these real practice sets that I've seen, most of them are one of these three: psychology, biology, or business. Rarely, sometimes, it's pretty rare though, you will have one something different like art or history or sociology, geology, I don't know, what have you, but it's not that common. Of course, if you're practicing you're not practicing with real practice tests, then maybe you find one of these topics or something different. But in your real test, chances are you will have one of these three, okay? Psychology, biology, or business. Now, psychology, I would say, is the easiest one, mainly because of its language, its vocabulary. It's quite easy to understand. It's mainly about our brain, how our mind works, how we interact with each other, how we process experiences, respond to them, or emotions, learning, memory, that kind of stuff. Biology is usually about animals or plants. You don't really have anything about humans. It's about how they organize, how their life processes are, their relationships. Something I've seen quite a lot is adaptations. So you will have something like how these animals adapt to certain changes, like climate change or something, or how seabirds have adapted to catch their prey, something like that. Okay, so that's right. That's really common to have. And finally, business is also quite easy to understand. If you have some vocabulary, then you're done, because yeah, sometimes you'll have these words that you're like, what does that mean? Like franchising or merchandising or I don't know. So sometimes you have these very specific words. So I recommend you check some vocabulary for that. But it will probably be about marketing strategies, advertising techniques, nothing that specific or that deep, into business. So that's it for the topics. Any questions about that before we change the slide? Okay. Now let's talk about what exactly you will be reading and listening to. So what you will have to do when you're reading, the first thing is read the title and take notes on that and make sure that you memorize what that is. In this case, it's even more important that in any other of the tasks that we have here, because this title is not like a summary. This is not a summary or something or just a title. This actually is the term. So this is the key term or the topic that you will have. So it's something that's going to be defined and explained and illustrated all over this question, and something that you need to mention in your response. So I think it's quite essential that you do mention this in your response. So you better remember what it is, or maybe take some notes if you can. So that's the type. And then when you read this, you can find different things here. You can have maybe some examples. You can have something like a short explanation, different things. But the main thing, the most important part, what you really want to do, what you want to focus on, the goal here is to find the definition for this topic. So you really got to find what this means. You can find a phrase, a sentence maybe, or you can paraphrase it. Now, obviously, you know that vocabulary is part of the rubric, right? So if you're just copying and pasting everything or like creating a transcript from the listening, you will be losing those points. But I wouldn't worry too much about just copying and pasting something from here or trying, not to change so much the words, because this is just going to make up like 10 or 15 seconds of your response. So you will have 45 seconds to explain in your own and using your own language and vocabulary the listening. Okay, so it's okay if you don't give it that much thought and you just take some words from here. You don't really have to change it that much. So, okay, can we please read this? Is there anyone who could read?
I can read, teacher.
Okay, thanks so much.
Okay. Behavior modification, K-team topic. Individuals often modify their behavior based on what they have learned about the possible consequence of their action. When an individual learns through experience that a certain behavior results in pleasant consequence, that behavior is likely to be repeated. An unpleasant consequence, on the other hand, discourage further repetition of the behavior. While behavior modification can be observed in experiments, it also occurs frequently in everyday setting. When individuals change their behavior based on what they have learned about the consequence of that behavior.
All right, great. So now, can you guys tell me what behavior modification is? So what's the definition that we got here?
Could be the consequences of the actions.
Okay, the consequences of the actions. It has to do with the consequences of your actions, but I'm not sure if that's exactly what it means, what it is.
It is the it will be the consequence of getting a pleasant or an unpleasant consequence, and how that affects in your everyday behavior.
Okay, so yeah, it has to do how you behave based on that. Okay, so yes, I think you guys both are right. I would maybe say it's something like a phenomenon or a tendency, or you could also use the word when a lot. So it's when people change their behavior or modify their behavior according to what they've learned, about, as you guys said, about the consequences of a certain behavior. So basically you act in a certain way and that leads to a result and you learn, right? So it's that idea, that process of learning through experience, or learning through the consequences or through what you know about the consequences of your behavior. So as I was saying, it's okay if you just choose a phrase or choose a certain sentence. Maybe you can change 1 or 2 words. You don't really have to try and paraphrase it that much. So I would go for this one here, the first one, or maybe the last one as well. So behavior modification occurs when individuals change their behavior based on what they've learned about the consequences of that behavior. So, okay, what happened? So that's behavior modification. All right, so it's the process of learning from the consequences of your actions. So is that okay, what you have to do here in the reading? I wouldn't really care that much about the details. So sometimes you will even have something longer with some other examples. Here you have like a more detailed explanation, right? So what happens when the consequence is pleasant or it's unpleasant? So whether you repeat or not that action. So I wouldn't really care about whether it's observed in experiments or in everyday settings. I just want to know what definition is. Sometimes you have these red flags like it occurs when, or this is known as, or this is called, or this is defined as. Okay, so try and find the definition and then you're done with the reading. You don't have that much time, 45 seconds to 50, not a lot. Okay, so any questions about that? Feel free to ask.
So here we should to explain about of the behavior modification, not only about of the behavior.
Exactly. Yes, yes, yeah. So this is the term, right? This is, you will have something like that always. So for example, if it's biology, you can have something like camouflage. So what is camouflage? It's when animals change their shapes or their colors in order to hide themselves from predators, maybe. So it's always the whole idea that you have in the title. That's a term, that's something that's going to be defined. You don't have to interpret it word by word, because sometimes you have something like, we're going to be doing this example. I mean, I think that's going to be the last example we'll do. It's comfort zone bias. So it's not really about comfort zone, it's about comfort zone bias. Okay, so yeah, it's about everything that you have in the title. It's a very specific concept, thing that you have in psychology or in this is a term that psychologists use. You know what I mean? So that's how it's going to be working. For example, if you guys want more examples, I think we have more here, like cognitive dissonance, right? So it's, again, what's this? This is, I think, again, I think it's when you create a contradiction between your actions and your beliefs, or the pick and rule. So what's the pick and rule? Or perceptual constancy, what's that? Okay, so it's always like that. It's a very specific term from that area. So is it okay then? Any questions? Okay.
Sorry. So we don't need to use a lot of details on the response, right?
No, exactly.
Okay.
In your response, this will be your introduction. The same way we did for task 2. So in your response, you will see that you need to take up like 15 seconds at most to talk about the reading. So you will say, according to the reading, behavior modification is when we change our behavior based on what we learn about the consequences of. So that's your intro. You don't need to explain that more, because otherwise you will run out of time and you won't have time to explain the listening, which is the most important and longer part. So you gotta really make it balanced. So that's why I'm saying you don't really care. You're not going to use any other information that you have here. Just focus on that definition. Okay. Any other thing? Okay, now. So then you will listen to the lecture. And what will the lecture be? So the lecture is just a further explanation on this topic. Now, in the lecture, the professor will give you real-world examples of when we see this in action. So when we see behavior modification in the real world. So when it's applied, or I don't know who does this, who modifies their behavior. So the thing is, depending on what topic you have, whether it's psychology, biology, or business, you will have a certain number of examples. So for instance, this is a psychology topic, right? It's about behavior. So when you have psychology topics, you will most likely have just one example. So it could be a story. It's usually stories from the professor's own life. So the professor can tell you something that he's seen, something that they've lived maybe in their own experience. So it could be like a short story. Maybe it could be something like, so when I was a kid, I remember doing this, and then I learned about the consequences of that behavior, so I changed my behavior. And of course, it's going to be detailed with some specific examples. It could be a more general example, something about a certain group of people in general. So it could be maybe kids do this, or maybe teenagers do it, or elderly people. Or maybe you see this in supermarkets, or in the grocery store, or in, I don't know, in the military, I don't know. Or it could be an experiment, which is something I've seen recently. So it's like you put a group of people in a room, you ask them to do this, and this is what happens. So that's demonstrating that we do that we modify our behavior, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so those are some things that you could have: a story, a general example, an experiment. And one thing you can do to help you out is just maybe, like in general, I would say just try to understand the relationship among ideas. So if you have any before and after, like sequence of events, if it's an experiment, then you will have, so first you do this, second, they're asked to do that. Subsequently, this happens. Afterwards, this other thing happens. The same if it's a story, right? If it's a more general example, then see how everything's connected, basically. Okay? And on the other hand, if you got a biology topic, then I guarantee you will have 2 examples, and it'll probably be 2 animals. So 2 animals that do that. So for example, camouflage. So maybe the hogs do this and this zebra does that. Okay? So what I can say here, sometimes you won't know the names of the animals, or we won't know those trees or those plants they're referring to. Just make sure that you take notes on the way they are pronounced. So the professor could be really telling you anything. Just make sure that you know how that name is pronounced. You can take notes on, and write however you want it. Just make sure that you're able to repeat that later in your response, because it's really important to understand those examples. If it's business, it could be 1 or 2 examples, by the way. So it could be a story from a company that used this type of technique, maybe franchising. So it's buying the name of a brand, maybe. So you have an example of a company that did that. Or sometimes you got 2 examples of maybe 2 different ways of applying that technique. I don't know. So the only way you're gonna really understand how this works is with some examples. So, all right, but in general, is that okay? Any questions? If it's psychology, 1 example, probably a story, and a general one or an experiment. If it's biology, 2, and if it's business, we don't know, it could be 1 or 2. So is that okay? Any questions? Okay. So how many examples are we gonna have for this one? What would you say?
1.
1, exactly. So it's gonna be about the same thing, but it may have more than 1 part. So let's see what we have. We're gonna listen to it now. All right. So make sure to take some notes. And what I want you guys to really, another thing, you know that the lecture lasts like 3 minutes maybe, or 2.5. And with the reading more, like you have some, like a good amount of information. But your response is supposed to be just 1 minute. So of course you're gonna have to summarize things, you're gonna have to leave some things behind. And that's okay, So when you're listening, I just want you to focus on what's important, on the relevant information. And the relevant information, is whatever illustrates directly this concept that you have. So I guarantee you guys will have something about some individuals. I don't know who they might be, but you will have some individuals. You will have a certain behavior. You will have learning about the consequences, so there will be some consequences of that behavior. So you will have like a very specific example for each part of the concept. And that's what's important. The details, again, you can maybe find 2 or 3, like take some examples or some samples from that, but it's not that important. All right, so just focus on the connection that the reading has with the listening. So how does the professor illustrate this concept? That's what you need to find out, okay? So let's listen to it, see how it goes.
Now listen to part of a lecture on the topic in a psychology class. This happens all the time with kids in schools. Say there's a little boy or girl who's just starting school. Well, they're not really used to the rules about proper behavior for a classroom. So at the beginning, they might, interrupt the teacher, walk around the classroom when they're supposed to be sitting down, just misbehaving in general. Okay, but what happens? Well, the teacher gets angry with them when they act this way. They might get punished. They have to sit at their desks when everyone else is allowed to go outside and play. And they certainly don't like that. Soon, they'll learn that this kind of behavior gets them in trouble. They'll also learn that when they raise their hand to talk to the teacher and sit quietly and pay attention during class, they're rewarded. The teacher tells them she's proud of them and maybe puts little happy face stickers on their homework. Now that their behavior gets a good reaction from the teacher, the kids learn to always act this way in class and not behave the way they used to.
Using the example from the lecture, explain what behavior modification is and how it works.
All right. Okay, guys, so what can you tell me about the example? What was it about?
He talked about the kids on the school when they are in the classroom and they have misbehavior, like I don't know, they don't say something when the teacher asks something like that, and the teacher punishment the kid, and he learned about that.
Okay, so when they misbehave, they get punished and they learn. And what else? There's something else. What happens if they
Well, when he learned about that behavior, he changed in a positive way, because the teacher give an award in order to change that behavior and give an award for that. So
okay, well, that's great. Now you got it. So that's perfect. So as you said, first, they are new in school, they don't know how to behave, so they start misbehaving. And the result is that they get punished, right? Because they misbehave. And then when they behave well, they learn that they get rewarded. So like they receive this happy face sticker, or I don't know. And so that's how they learn that that's how they're supposed to act. And then they change their behavior, right? So they basically change their initial behavior or misbehaving based on what they've learned about the consequences, because they know that they will get punished if they misbehave, and they will get rewarded if they behave well. So that's how they learn, based on the consequences of their actions. They learn how to behave. So they learn to always act in that way. Okay, so as you can see, we have a lot of cause effect, like misbehave, get punished. If you behave well, you get rewarded. And also like a sequence, right? So first they are misbehaving because they don't know how to act. Then they learn that that gets them in trouble. So they behave well, they are rewarded. And then finally they learn that that's how they're supposed to act, and they start acting that way. So that's it. Those are the most important ideas from the listening. You don't really have to explain that much. Maybe I liked what you did of mentioning maybe like a few examples. You could say, if they misbehave, for example, they may be interrupting the teacher. So I don't really have to say everything, right? So they're walking around the classroom, they're supposed to be sitting down, or you don't really care so much about the details, but you care more about those key ideas, right? So you can mention one of the or two of them, and that's okay. But the most important part will always be these, okay? So that's it for the listening. I will maybe try and take notes on those key ideas. And if you think about it, that's really closely related to this, isn't it? Because it's really illustrating how kids change their behavior in school based on what they've learned. And what have they learned? They've learned that behaving badly leads them to trouble, behaving well gets them rewarded. So those are the consequences. And how do they act? They start acting well, right? So is that okay, you guys, what you have in the listening, what you need to do there? Does it make sense? Any questions? Okay. So as you can see, when you have these psychology topics, it's quite easy to understand. The vocabulary is not that complicated. Even the register, it's a bit informal, like, okay, but what happens? Or well, or I don't know. When you have biology, it could be harder. It's longer too. So you just need to maybe pay attention to those transitions, like what adaptation is, another adaptation is, maybe the names of the animals or the plants. So for example, redwood trees. So it doesn't matter if you don't know how to write this, okay, redwood trees, as long as you have something, maybe, I don't know, something like, if you write in your notes redwood trees, then that's okay because you know how to pronounce it, right? So just make sure that you catch, the first part will always be the most important part. So one adaptation is this ability, the other one is this other thing, and then the example, the names of the plants, the animals, I don't know. Okay, if we got time, we're going to be doing a biology one as well. So is that okay? Any questions so far? All right, so moving on, what you have to do in your response. So I was already telling you about a bit about this earlier. So at the beginning, you need a short introduction in which you're gonna explain what the topic is and its definition. So you can say something like, according to the reading passage or the article, topic is the title, basically. So that's why it's so important that you remember it, because you need to mention it. So according to the reading passage, behavior modification is when people change their behavior based on what they learn about the consequences of their actions. So that's your introduction. It doesn't need more explaining. It's just one sentence, something short, and it's just the definition. And then finally, you move on to the lecture. So you say, in the lecture, the professor further illustrates this concept with the example of, and then you tell me about the example of kids and how they initially misbehave in class. However, they learn about the consequences of that behavior, and this happens, and blah, blah, blah. Okay? So, of course, you can change the words. If you don't like something from this template, you can say something. If you can also do something shorter, like in the lecture, furthermore, the professor gives the example of, or provides the example of, or digs deeper into this concept with this example. So there are many ways of rephrasing it. Just make sure that you have that transition, that you use these reporting verbs, not only here, but during your whole response, right? So the professor mentions that kids will learn how to behave because of these reasons. Okay, so those are some things I can say. Some tips here, if you think about it, your question is, using the example from the lecture, explain behavior modification, right? So there's this thing. Some people will say that this is the hardest task from the speaking because of that, because you're supposed to connect ideas. You have the reading, you have the listening, and you gotta connect them and use the listening to explain the reading. So it sounds quite complicated. In the other ones, you're just summarizing, right? In task 2, you're asked to summarize everything. So summarize the reading, summarize the listening. But in this one, you gotta connect the ideas. You will see that in task 4, you don't have the reading anymore. So you just have to summarize the listening. So what I can say here, maybe in your response, if you're able to briefly relate, try to tell me how this relates to their definition, maybe you could say, so that's how kids learn about the consequences of their behavior, and they learn to act or to behave well in class. Okay, so I'm kind of connecting them both, So I'm saying, so kids learn based on the consequences of their actions. Or you could say, so this is when you talk about getting punished, you could say, so getting punished is the consequence misbehaving. Okay, so you can try and do that and relate ideas as much as you can. Or you could say, as the passage mentions, when, when this happens, this other thing happens, just like it happens to kids, right? Or just like kids do in school. So what I'm trying to say is just make sure that you're actually showing how the reading is related to the listening. Okay, so how is it that the professor is illustrating that concept? So I don't know if that's okay, you guys. Is it? Any questions or comments? Feel free to tell me if there's something that maybe is not so clear.
Teacher, and do we need to have a concluding sentence? Or
Okay.
only the lecture?
All right, so great question. You don't need to have one. So of course you can have something that's kind of tell me that you're wrapping it up, something like that's how kids learn or something. But you don't have to have one, something so formal like in conclusion, this is the example and this is the reading. Not really. You don't also, I mean, you don't have time for that either. But in case you have extra time, this is only in case you have extra time. Okay, if you don't worry about it. But if you have like 10 seconds and you don't know what to say, you can say something like here. Maybe you can say in short. So I'm gonna put here. So you can say something like in short, that's how the professor demonstrates behavior modification, right? Or if you got like 20 seconds and you're stuck and you have no idea what to say, you can do something longer. You could say, in short, that's how, by using the example of kids and how they behave in class or how they learn how to behave in class, the professor demonstrates behavior modification. Okay, so that depends how long you want to do it on how much time you have. But in reality, it's not necessary to do one. So as long as you're mentioning or retelling the example, it's fine. Okay. Any other question? Okay, guys. So, is there anyone who would like to try with this example here? So you just have to put everything together. We know what the definition is, the topic, the example. So any volunteers for this? Anyone would like to give it a try?
I can try, teacher.
Okay, great. All right. So you can go ahead now.
Okay. According to the reading passage, according to the reading passage, and behavior modification is when the people change their behavior. I'm sorry, teacher. I'm really nervous. Maybe I can try again.
Okay, that's okay, sure. Your first try, don't worry. You can go ahead.
Okay. According to the reading passage, the behavior modification is when the people change their behavior when they feel that their action are pleasant or unpleasant. And in the lecture, furthermore, the professor mentioned an example like kids, when the kids have misbehavior, like interrupt the teacher, and the teacher punishment that behavior, and the kids change in a positive way, and the behavior change, and when this behavior change, the kids has a positive behavior, and the teacher award that. That's all, teacher. So I'm really nervous.
Okay, so I think that was actually pretty good to be your first try. Yes, you were nervous, but that's just practice, until you get used to it. But I think I think you did it just fine. So I like that you summarized the lecture, and it was clear. So okay, so maybe at the beginning, try to, when you have 30 seconds to prepare. In this case, it didn't give you those 30 seconds, but since you have those 30 seconds, something you guys can do is try and prepare this. So try to already have in mind what you're gonna say here, what your definition is, and try to make it short, so that then you're gonna start your 60 seconds and you have that memorized, learned by heart. So just go ahead and say it, and then you can here elaborate that in your own way. So you have more time for that. That's something you guys can do. All right, what else? Okay, I think it was pretty well explained. Maybe regarding the reporting verbs, make sure that they are all in the simple present. Okay, so the professor mentions, illustrates, provides, because it's like you're reporting this, right? Like you're a reporter and you're saying, okay, so the professor says this, the reading says that, but obviously try not to say says. What else? I like that you were connecting ideas. So you said, so their behavior changes. So I like that, okay? It's really related to the reading. And it shows that you know that that connection, that you really understood, you know, what it was about. Maybe some grammar, careful with third person, like kids has, kids have, or the professor punish, or the teacher punishes them. Okay, but overall, that was an awesome response. I think you're getting there. Okay. All right, guys. So now we're gonna do one. I mean, you guys are gonna do one. So any questions before we look at the next task?
Teacher, can I try?
This one here?
Yes, can I try?
Yes, of course.
I'm not sure if it's correct that I am doing.
All right.
Okay.
Of course, go ahead.
According to the reading passage, behavior modification is when the people change the behavior in consequence of some experience. In the lectures, the professor further illustrates this concept by providing the example. When the kids have negative behavior, the teacher punishes them. And when the kids have positive behaviors, the teacher give a present, that concluding that the kids change the behavior.
Okay, so that was fantastic. Well done. So you see how you had some extra time. You could have done a conclusion there. Your intro was perfect. It lasted 10 seconds. So that's really what you want to achieve here. A short conclusion. I think you got that prepared, and that's why you were able to, you know, get it done, and then you moved on to the example. Okay, nothing to say really. Maybe some tips. I like that you're trying to use this transition. So that concludes in, or that leads to the, or that leads to, or that results in kids changing their behavior according to what they've learned. Okay, you could also do that conclusion at the end. Instead of saying and, you could say, for example, on the other hand, so first they misbehave and blah, blah, blah. On the other hand, when they behave well, this happens. What else? Maybe careful. There's just one grammar tip for you. And for everyone, really careful with the use of the indefinite article, right? So the people, the kids. You know that when it's something general and it's plural, you don't really need the indefinite article or use that, you know. So you can just say, so according to the reading passage, this is when people change their behavior. So the example of kids and how they do this. So every time you have something general, so you're talking about people in general, kids in general, or you could say students are, I don't know, students don't learn nowadays. So students in general. Okay, so every time something general, you don't need the indefinite article anymore. Okay, so that's just one grammar tip for everyone. And yeah, I really like the timing. I like that it was summarized, it was clear, concise. Maybe that conclusion, and you're definitely getting it right. So it was great. Okay. Any questions now? Okay, so let's do one more. This is gonna be a similar one. So I'm gonna leave you with the, okay, not that. All right. So here's the reading for you guys. You will have 50 seconds to read this. Okay, so you can go ahead. All right. So now let's go with the lecture.
Now listen to part of a lecture in a psychology class.
Okay, so this comes up a lot when people make career decisions. A friend of mine from college always wanted to be a film reviewer. He was a film major and he loved movies. Most of all, he loved to write about movies. So when he graduated, he looked for a job as a film reviewer for a newspaper because, as a film reviewer, he'd get to see films for free and would be paid to write about them. That's what he loved. But he couldn't find a job as a film reviewer. So he took a position as a news reporter instead for a newspaper, investigating stories, writing about events, what news reporters do. Now, at first, my friend wasn't sure he'd be any good at this. He'd never been a news reporter before. But eventually, he adjusted and gained confidence, and he got used to the job. And he realized he was actually a pretty good reporter. Anyway, here's the thing. After a few years, the film reviewer for the newspaper where he worked quit, and my friend was offered her job. This was his dream, right? His opportunity to be a film reviewer had finally come, and the new job would actually pay more, too. But did he take the job? Nope, he turned it down. He told me he'd gotten used to being a news reporter, and he just didn't want to try something else. It seemed like too big of a change since, well, there was a chance that the new job might not work out.
Using the example from the lecture, explain the comfort zone bias.
Okay. So now you will have 30 seconds to prepare your response. Okay. So who wants to go first? Anyone? Okay, maybe Hussein, you there?
Okay.
Okay, Hussein. So you can go ahead.
Okay. According to the reading, psychologists have found how the people or how humans take decisions or raise decisions in the rest of their lives. They usually to choose a comfort zones to be a comfort zones, and they prefer to maintain these comfortable situations because they avoid they always avoid unfamiliar situations. So psychologists think the comfort zone is a natural instinct when natural instinct explain how humans survive before times.
Okay, Hussein. All right. So I see you had a pretty long explanation on what comfort zone bias is, but you're not mentioning the example, are you? So you're missing the part, you're missing the listening part. You the example about the professor's friend that wanted to be a film reviewer and stuff. So that part you need to mention here. Remember that this is just one response that you will have, right? 60 seconds in which you have to combine both what you know from the reading and what you know from the listening. and you need to retell the story that the professor tells in the same way. So don't generalize it. You just need to talk about his friend. You need to talk about what he wanted to be or how he stayed in his comfort zone or what happened there. You need to tell me the story, okay? So you need to combine both. At the beginning, of course, you need to mention what comfort zone bias is, but it's gotta be short, all right? So it's gotta be something real quick. So one of the things you said would be enough. So according to the reading passage, comfort zone bias is the tendency of staying or remaining in your comfort zone. That's it, quickly. And then you need to focus more on the story. So you need to tell me, in the lecture, the professor illustrates this with the example of his friend. And what happened to his friend, you tell me now. So he wanted to be this, he got this job, and this happened to him. So how is it that he stayed in his comfort zone? How was he experiencing this comfort zone bias? Okay. So I don't know if it's making sense. Is it? Like first, you gotta tell me something about the reading, the definition, short, and then you move on to the lecture, and you need to retell the story. So is it okay? Yes, Hussein?
Yeah, I couldn't listen well the listening, so I suppose many.
Oh, okay, yeah. I see.
So I suppose that, but don't worry, I understood well now.
All right. Okay, got it. So in that case, so if you didn't quite understand the listening, then yes, that's something you can do and talk more about the reading. However, if I mean anything, I'm sure you've gotten something from the listening, you know, even if it's then you know that it's a story about a job or about choosing careers, something, even if it's short, even if it's something you wouldn't think makes that much sense or is not that related, try and mention it. So you could say, and at least mention something. So, okay, Lucia, I'll go with you in a sec. But if you don't know anything that's mentioned in the listening, at least acknowledge that there is a listening. So you could say, in the lecture, the professor further illustrates this concept by providing an example that, and you need to kind of make your way out of it. So you're going to say, by providing an example that shows how comfort zone is, I don't know, is comfort zone bias is due to this, I don't know, tendency that we have of staying in our comfort zones and avoiding risk, and because we don't have to try anything new. So at least mention that there is a lecture. Okay, so if that's your case, guys, if anything like that happens to you, you don't know anything from the lecture, you still need to acknowledge that there's a lecture, and you know at least what it is. You know that there's a lecture that illustrates that concept. So tell me that there's a lecture that illustrates this concept. It illustrates how, and then you continue with that reading. All right. Okay. So now, Lucia, what were you saying?
Teacher, I would like to try maybe. Can I?
Of course. Yes, sure,
Okay.
sure. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, according to the reading passage, comfort zone bias is a natural preference for what we know, but also avoid taking risks. On the recording, some friend of someone illustrates this concept, bringing an example like we try to choose the career and we make decisions. And for example, his friend he enjoyed the movies and he was looking for to find a job according to that. So he tried to gain confidence and he was a pretty good reporter. But even though he got another kind of job with a better pay, he preferred to be a news reporter only. So in this, sorry.
Hey, but what were you gonna say at the end?
So I wanted to say that in conclusion, we are similar like his friend, and we take only the comfort zone.
Okay, all right. Okay, so great. About that, if you're okay, if you guys are trying to say something like generalizing and applying it to we, to us, in general, to people. So you can do that, but I would rather, I mean, it would be better if you just stay to the example. So you could say, so in conclusion, his friend, instead of saying we tend to stay in our comfort zones because we want to avoid risks. In conclusion, his friend stayed in his comfort zone because he wanted to avoid risks. Okay, so try to keep it that way. So don't generalize it and tell me about us in general, but try to keep it in the same way that the professor explains it with the professor. With his friend, sorry. So regarding your response, I really liked it. I liked how you summarized it. I liked that the beginning was short, the definition was clear, the example was also clear. Okay, the way you told the story was pretty direct, I would say. And maybe you can try and add some transitions there. When you have these stories, that's your chance. You could say, so first, I don't know, the professor had this friend. So first he wanted to be a film reviewer. Afterwards, or he didn't find a job as a film reviewer. Therefore, he started working as a news reporter. Subsequently, when he eventually he got the chance of working as a film reviewer, which was his dream job, what he always wanted to be. He had a better pay. I don't know, you could say. However, he turned down the job since he was experimenting this comfort zone bias, right? He wanted to avoid any risk and stay there where he was. So try and use those transitions. This is your chance really when you have these stories. What else? I think, that's it. I think that the way you summarized it was pretty awesome. Maybe you were missing some more time for that conclusion, but it wasn't really necessary that you did one. Just try maybe and connect those ideas a bit more as you go. And I think, well done. That was great.
Thank you, teacher.
All right, guys. So any questions about that? Is everything okay? Everything clear? Okay then, guys. So the good thing is that even though we haven't had that much time to practice, you will tomorrow, right? You will have your practice session with Jasmani. And also we will be looking at this in the speaking session, sorry. So we will be practicing it. All right, guys. So before you go though, don't forget the daily survey. All right, guys. So thanks so much for joining. I'll see you all next week. Hope you have a nice weekend.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Andrea.
teacher.
Have a
Thank you,
nice
guys.
weekend
Thank you,
too.
teacher. Goodbye.
Goodbye.